Once again, it is another night that did not go the West Virginia Mountaineers' way. West Virginia losing 83-78. Jalen Bridges returned to Morgantown, returned to West Virginia. The native son that departed to Baylor ends up not going the way of the Mountaineers, and a victory for Jalen Bridges and Baylor. West Virginia now 0-4 in conference play. Another loss. Overtime, once again, they got back in it, but once again, another loss. And a Mountaineers season that really showed some promise at one point is now feeling like same old story and having this season go down the drain, even though this is a different cast of characters. This is our WVU postgame show, our West Virginia Hoops postgame show. I'm Mike Asti, and I am joined by our Ethan Bock, who is still live at the Coliseum, sticking with us to be able to provide this postgame show. And this was kind of a rockin' atmosphere because of Bridges' return, but also because of the desperation of this team, and then also kind of a balloon that got popped to this fan base, this team, maybe the atmosphere a little bit of this that maybe led to the Baylor win of Jose Perez appeal getting denied. So he will not be on this team this year. There's nothing they can do about it. And now the question, will he play on this team next year? Huggins did talk about it. We'll get to all of that later on this show. But Ethan, to get us started, this was a game that Baylor, it seemed like, had control for a while throughout. And then I saw one of your tweets, like, what is this game? It's getting crazy. Towards the end, it felt like, okay, is West Virginia going to actually steal this? Are they gaining some momentum? They had a lead towards the end. Baylor then would get back there. Bridges was just money pretty much all throughout this game, certainly on the glass. And he had a vibe to him that, hey, it almost felt like he was embracing being the heel and liked the hate, which, again, he's from West Virginia, didn't even just go to the school. So he was relishing the vibe. The team didn't shoot well enough early on, tried to pick it up late again. Another game, they get to OT, but then they don't get the job done. So what do you make of this team now? Because we talked, it seems like just yesterday, but was about a week ago, on how this team needed to at least get a couple games in conference play. They then dropped the first two, but those are the teams that you felt like they should have beat. And then you had Kansas and Baylor coming up. You said these were must wins. They could not go 0-4 if they wanted this to be a special year, certainly in conference play. Well, they do it. Surprise, surprise. They're 0-4 in conference play. They're going to win one, but they're 0-4 in conference play. How did we get here?
West Virginia once again couldn't close out a game. They're up 5 with just 6-7 minutes to go. Had all the momentum in their hand. They had a hostile crowd ready for Jalen Bridges' return. And once again, this West Virginia team gets in foul trouble. Eric Stevenson, Kedrian Johnson, Trey Mitchell all foul out. And then by the end of the game, you have your bench lineup in trying to salvage anything. And once again, this team couldn't close it out.
Yeah, and again, Baylor led after the first half, but West Virginia did play well in that second half. We've seen that in recent games. They ended up playing well at the end of Oklahoma State, of Kansas State, but once again, not being enough. Kansas kind of took control and got a comfortable victory, but they played right with so many teams, with the exception of the Kansas game and just a bad night at Xavier, really, certainly at the end. This team has played competitive in every game this year, and that includes Purdue, which is a strong out-of-conference opponent that's been a number one ranked team in the country at one point this season. So it's not even like last year where maybe they weren't tested. They have been battle-tested. They had a quality out-of-conference game or two. You get here to conference play, though, and it almost seems like it's a broken record for us, and I'm sure for Huggins, and even I'm sure fans are beaten down because we're talking about them not playing well at the end of games, Stevenson fouling out, a slow start. They play well in the beginning of a second half. They have a lead. They squander it. They play competitive, but they don't end up winning in these big games, these conference games. It is literally the same story every one of these. And Eric Stevenson just the other day apologized for his actions at Kansas State, and he really was at fault despite being a team MVP, said it wouldn't happen again. It didn't happen to that level, but fouled out again. I mean, this team mentally feels like they are unraveling.
Yeah, I don't even know how to explain it. It really is just a broken record. This is a whole new team. Only 5 guys returned from last season, and it seems
Right.
like
So,
it's the
right. So it's
exact
not,
same
it's
team.
not, yeah, that's what's annoying. Like as we know, like it isn't like the whole answer of, well, it's just the same old story again. They've been doing this for several years. Like, no, they have not. This group has not been doing it for several years. It's just this year, but it's similar to what happened last year and the year before. There's not really a common denominator. Of course, there's One Direction fans can go if you believe there's to be a common denominator, but in terms of the players, there's not really a common denominator, but it keeps happening again.
Yeah, West Virginia, literally, it sounds stupid, but they just have to win one game. Like
You do have to get one.
they,
Yes.
all it is they have to win one game. Say they win tonight against Baylor, that at least gives them some confidence and momentum heading into the Oklahoma game on the road on Saturday. Now they're sitting here 0-4. They're one of 2 teams left in the conference with no wins.
Yeah.
And now you have to go onto the road against an Oklahoma team who competed against Kansas and Lawrence the other night. So every game in this conference, we've said all season, is tough. There's no easy wins. They're all going to be tough losses. They're all going to be quote unquote good losses, but there's no such thing as a good loss in college basketball. So
I mean, I guess there kind of is when you're talking about bracketology and event, and that does go to resume, like there kind of is. But I think what the correct statement is, there's not a such thing as quality losses if you have too many. Like you can, right? They can absolutely add up. If you would have lost this game after, if you would have beat Oklahoma State and beat Kansas State, and then you lose to Kansas, who appears to be significantly better than you, but they were the number 3 team in the country at the time of the game, and then you lose this game, I think some people out there, certainly people who are putting brackets together, could say, okay, yeah, it was at home, but it was Jalen Bridges' return. Perez's news happened an hour before tip. You just showed you're good every other night. So Baylor's good. They're recent champ. Kansas is the defending. Obviously, they're top 5 again. You're not beating elite teams, but you're beating who you should beat. You're still a tournament team. You're still good. You're a top 6 seed still. You're just not a top 2 seed. But you don't have those cussionary games. Like, you lost the games that should have made you safe and be able to handle these blows more. That's why now it sounds stupid to say. I'm not even going to talk or write about it because it's just, it's obvious. Oklahoma's now a must-win game. Every game they play at this point is now, they're all must-wins. They got to win one. The next game they play is a must-win game. You can't 0-5, 0-6, 0-7. I made a bet with a follower, actually, that they were going to be better than last year just by the fact that they weren't going to lose 7 in a row multiple times like last year. Well, we got 3 more losses here, and I'm going to be pretty upset because, they're about to lose. They could lose 7 in a row.
We're more than halfway there. We're more than halfway there.
We're more than halfway there. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti. The Mountaineers lose in overtime. Jalen Bridges gets the win over West Virginia, and the Mountaineers now 0-4 in conference play. So I'm going to ask you this question then, because we were talking off the air, and it's also true that in the midst of these losses, and they're quadrant 2 losses, quadrant 1 losses, certainly against Kansas. So that is a little bit of a cushion, even though you got to start winning some games. Why do you believe that West Virginia is still kind of getting national respect, getting Joe Lunardi to still put them comfortably, not on a bubble, but comfortably in the NCAA tournament, despite this losing streak? And you even said you think they're still going to be a top 10 seed by Lunardi, certainly still comfortably in the tournament, even after this loss. They play well, but lose again, 0-4 in conference play. Why? Why are they gaining so much respect, whether it be the polls, the computers, the respected members of media, despite now losing? Because you eventually can only, you got to start winning. You can only lose so much, but the wins and losses have not affected the confidence level of the people that actually do matter, even though obviously this is frustrating for fans.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, especially from last season to this year, is just West Virginia just has a better resume, just win margin wise. You go to Pitt, win by 25. You beat Florida by 30. You beat UAB by double digits. Those are really good wins on the resume. Now Pitt's arguably a top 25 team. UAB is going to
Yeah.
make the tournament, winning their conference. Florida's a competitive SEC team, so they have good wins on their schedule. And then, like we said, they don't have any bad losses. There's
Yeah.
no losses in quad 3, quad 4.
Played
They're
right with
nine.
Purdue. Right.
Yeah, they're 9-0. They're 9-0 in games that aren't quad 1 games. So when it comes to playing the top teams in the country, they're 1-6. Like, it looks bad, but at the same time, it's quote unquote good losses. So that's why West Virginia is still getting respect, is because they've showed signs of beating tournament quality teams, and not just beating them, but beating them by 20, 30 points. So West Virginia's got a lot more breathing room in
Yeah.
Big 12 play, to where they can lose 4 games right out of the stretch and they'll still be a 10, 11 seed in Lenardi's bracketology.
Yeah, it does appear that if West Virginia somehow does not make the NCAA tournament field, it is their own fault, because they are getting benefit of the doubt off of benefit of the doubt in terms of nationally, and are still comfortably in this tournament. We'll see what the bracket shows after now another conference loss, but I do think, yeah, they had big wins, and there were people that felt they weren't even playing well and yet winning by 20 or 30. Like Huggins thought they should have won by 40 or 50 in some of those games, as insane as that sounds. So they really had a quality stretch out of conference play. You could argue that if they would have beat Xavier, it'd be borderline perfect, because Purdue was obviously favored against West Virginia and it was far away from home. So they did really well out of conference. It was a better out of conference schedule than last year. It was tougher than a lot of people play in the country, right on par with the rest of the conference and what they play, except for maybe Kansas, but they're the elite of the elite, obviously. And then you just get into conference play and it does feel like a whole different team. So in terms of on the court, Toussaint leads with 20 points. Eric Stevenson, who was a team MVP for a while, the team leader, he's now really already taken a loss in terms of his mental collapse against Kansas State. 10 points in this game. He just hasn't been the same guy. He hasn't been as impactful. Trey Mitchell and others. Trey Mitchell now more removed from surgery. You figure he should be healthier, but he's actually regressed a little bit. On the court, what do they need to do to get back to where they were? Can they do so? And do you now either envision or think they should tinker this lineup a little bit? Because there are some players that when they're in, they show signs of maybe being a spark plug, and then they're right back out of there. Huggins does rely on these veterans, which maybe is a criticism of him over the years, despite obviously being a legend and a Hall of Fame coach who's had tons of success. But now those stars he doesn't seem to be able to rely on as much. So do you tinker something? Huggins has been very prone to tinker lineups. We saw him a couple of seasons ago put out a different lineup every game. He's stuck with this same crew and with really the same mentality all through games. How much longer does that go, and should we now see some changes for the Mountaineers?
Yeah, something's clearly different with this team. Feel like it's been like that way for the last month or so, ever since the UAB game. And then they play Stony Brook and Buffalo kind of close, without Emmett Matthews, but still shouldn't have
Right.
been a close game either way.
Right.
There's something wrong with this team, and the biggest thing I see is there's not as much offensive ball movement. I feel like at the beginning of the season, yeah, they're playing lesser competition, but West Virginia's ball movement was way, way, way much better than last season. I mean, they were starting out games shooting 80, 90% from the field for the first 10 minutes. And now it's a struggle for them to even score 5 points in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So the scoring and the shooting is the biggest key to why this team has regressed over the last month. And I think Hugs tinkle. I think he messes with the lineup a little bit. You have to. I mean, you've got to get desperate. You're 0-4. You're one of 2 teams left in the conference without a win. And he's got to fight. He's got to fight for this team to get back into the tournament, and that's playing your best guys. I've said all year that one of this team's best strengths is their depth. But clearly, in the Big 12, it's not translated over from non-conference play. So
No.
I'm thinking Huggins picks his 8, 9 best guys, and he uses the rest as fill-ins, hop in for any foul trouble, because there's going to be on this team. I feel like 2-3 guys foul at every game.
I was almost going to say, because I know you dismissed it, and it made sense to do so when I asked you a couple of games ago, not benching anybody, obviously, in the midst of the Eric Stevenson drama, but does Huggins send any message to his stars by giving him a little bit lesser in terms of minutes just because of the foul trouble, certainly at end of games? He needs them, obviously. They're the better players. They're the experienced ones. But now it's almost like I can lose without you as much as I can lose with you in these final 2 or 3 minutes. So if you're going to squander a lead as a fifth-year senior and then get in foul trouble and you're going to foul out of a game, I might as well let somebody else do it. Like now it almost seems like, yeah, if you don't tinker with the lineup and you don't send any message to anybody and you just keep riding the course, then that would be some justified criticism then, because this team is just not winning games any longer. And despite these being quad 1, quad 2 games, you do have to eventually start winning some games. It sounds very simple. We're a broken record here, but it's just until we get it changed, there's nothing else to say. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here, at WVU Postgame show. The Mountaineers do lose 83-78. And looking at this box score, it's funny, Ethan, because if you didn't watch this game at all and you just looked at this, and you don't have the final score in front of you, you would probably think West Virginia won this. Now, I understand Trusant got 20, and you probably don't want him to be your leading scorer. I understand Eric Stevenson went 3 for 9. You need more from him. But overall, as a team, they out-rebound Baylor. They turn it over less than Baylor. And I'm talking offensive rebound, defensive rebound. They have more assists than Baylor. And free throw shooting wise, which has been a real problem for this team, certainly was against Oklahoma State, certainly was against Kansas State. They're at 72% in this game. They're right on par with Baylor. Baylor was a little bit better, but it wasn't horrendous like it has been in other losses, certainly recently. So how do you make sense of that? It's almost like you go into this game and Huggins preaches and you're evaluating, and I'm sure you say to yourself, well, if they out-rebound, they turn it over less. Huggins' problem earlier in the season when they weren't winning by enough against lesser competition was they were turning it over way too much, averaging 14 per game at one point, 7 in this game. You can't really ask for less than that against quality teams, and you're out-rebounding teams with almost 40 rebounds again. They've been consistently getting near 40 rebounds every game. Overall, numbers-wise, what more could you do? Even though when you watch it, our eyes tell us they're not playing well enough. They're not nearly what they used to be. But these team numbers actually are not that bad, and they were better than Baylor.
Yeah. Yeah, I would even throw in the bench points in there. West Virginia outscored Baylor's bench 37-4.
3-2 in blocks. The Mountaineers win almost across the board here.
I think it literally comes down to the free throws missed in the later part of the second half. West Virginia shot 73%.
It's still close too.
It's still close. It's still close, but I think it just comes down to those free throws missed.
Steals. Baylor has a significant edge in steals. I mean, they did turn some points over from the steals. Yeah. West Virginia basically didn't do anything there. That's the only category that jumps out at you. Like, okay, Baylor dominated this. They're able to pick the pocket a few more times than WVU.
But Baylor doesn't even take advantage of those turnovers. Right. They only have 8 points off turnovers. That's the crazy
there you
part.
Go. Right.
It's this box score is wild when you really sit and look at it. But I think the short answer is it just comes down to those free throws missed. Baylor wins the free throw battle by 5%. They shot relatively the same amount of free throws, 36 by Baylor, 33 by West Virginia. I just think it comes down to that at the end of the game.
Yeah, and I'm sure they knew that going in because I'm sure Huggins is preaching it, but that's really how good this Big 12 is. Like, that's how good this Big 12 is. The margin for a victory or a loss, it's razor thin. And to win every one of these categories and miss a few free throws at the end and have that sneak up on you and lose in overtime after you had a lead at the end of the game, you can make an argument this is now the most devastating loss of the season. We've said that a few other times already this year. Said it after Xavier. That could have been a great non-conference victory because you're playing close with these teams, but you didn't really get a major out-of-conference win except for you have Florida, UAB, and Pitt. But in terms of elite competition, and then, okay, that's not a big deal. You get into conference play, the first couple games, you feel like those are the teams you should beat. You squander those, so now they're the worst losses. Kansas was going to dominate you, and they did, but losing the way you did maybe exposed the team and felt like a really bad loss just because really we're not in it. And it made it look like there's a major bar between you and Kansas. I mean, maybe there shouldn't be program wise. And then here, this feels like a game that the Mountaineers let get away in a way, especially with the emotions of Bridges being
there. Yeah, like you said, it just comes down to it sounds crazy, but just a couple free throws off, and that's it. They win pretty much every other statistical category, yet they still lose. I think Baylor took advantage of the momentum that they had towards the end of the second half, with West Virginia missing some of those free throws and having guys getting in foul trouble, getting fouled out of games, to where West Virginia has to bring in Seth Wilson and Kobe Johnson, Mo Wagi, all these young guys off the bench that they don't play in these type of situations. Baylor took advantage of that with the veterans that they have.
Yeah, and anybody who wanted some of those guys to get more minutes at the end of games because the veterans were kind of messing up, well, now you saw what would happen if they do have those minutes at the end of games, and that's not clearly going to work out either. You got to rely on your vets and your better players, and those vets and better players haven't been the same guys that they were earlier in the season, certainly not in conference play. And now we're going to touch on a few other things here before we wrap things up here on our WVU Postgame show. Of course, WV Sports Now is where all of our coverage of this Mountaineer loss to Baylor certainly lives. Ethan Bock was there in location, and I'm going to get to also Bridges' return and any comments from him here in a moment as well before we wrap things up. But the other piece of news of the day that was right before tip-off and is the other point of contention that you can point to, okay, what's changed for this team? They're playing a lot worse than they were just a month ago. Well, number one, you go from out-of-conference play to conference play. They played some good out-of-conference teams, but in conference play, it's good team, great team, good team, really good team, great team every other night. So it is a gauntlet. It's going to be tougher game in and game out. The other thing that's different, and we know this to be true just from hearing what these players said, on the record, off the record, the vibe that was around the team, what Huggins was alluding to, what others have even said off the record, that they all thought Perez was eventually going to be part of this team, even after losing the first waiver request. They thought he was going to eventually win the appeal. Perez himself thought he was going to be part of this team. Huggins, it seemed like the way he was talking, thought he'd eventually get Perez, even if they didn't win it the first time, and he was upset about how long it's taking. Let's just get this over with and get him on the floor. WVU thought he was going to be on this team, and I even had people messaging me saying, I just talked to an assistant coach, saw him at a barber shop, and he told me, don't worry about it, Perez is going to get on this team. West Virginia thought they were getting Perez and going to win this appeal. So that's the other difference. We talked about it last show. I've now publicly brought it up because, hey, you got to go there. Since they lost the initial decision and now the appeal, this team has not looked the same mentally. It's not even just their style of play. They have unraveled mentally. We saw it against Kansas State. It's been happening to Stevenson in particular. He was the rock and the leader prior, and he also was the most vocal saying Perez will be on this team, free Jose, and Perez is, I'm with you. So I don't know if he's taken it the hardest or what's happened, but now in retrospect, 0-4, do you feel like there's any more validity to that? And then separate to that question about this team and how they've been handling the Perez loss, I guess, what was the vibe around this team? What was the vibe at the arena, fans, media, players, etc., to learn that it's over? We've done everything we can. This kid's not playing this year. It's next year or bust. And I know he was there. And I can't even imagine him being there because he was on Twitter talking about how devastated he was, but he was there in attendance.
Yeah, I mean, he was on the floor about 10 minutes after the news came out. I was shocked that Jose came out, honestly. I understand he's a part of the team. He wants to be a part of the team. He looked devastated. He didn't look like not that he wanted to be there, but you know where I'm getting at. It's just not the right vibe, especially finding out just recently that you weren't going to be allowed to play this season. So yeah, vibes weren't good with the team on that. Obviously, Coach Huggins after the game had a lot to say, especially to the NCAA, saying they don't know what the hell they're doing. He talked about how great Jose is as a kid, as a player, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sucks for Jose. We've talked about this, I feel like, plenty of times over the last 2-3 months.
It's
Makes no
ridiculous.
sense. Makes
Not
no
at all.
sense why he's not eligible.
Especially if Manhattan's not blocking it, because that was what I'll admit I thought initially. Okay, that's the only thing that makes sense. They're in their feelings. They're bitter. They're blocking it. They've since publicly said they were not blocking Jose. So I don't know if that's true or not. But if they really aren't blocking him and we're not trying to deny him going to another school because his head coach was fired 10 days before his season started, then what did happen? Like if they're not at fault, then what happened? Because players have since transferred, come and gone. Manhattan's acquired players. Football players have been in and out of the portal. JT Daniels, Van Wilder, basically, of the transfer portal. I know Jose's transferred before, but you said it perfectly. Out of all these wild scenarios throughout college sports, and some players are handling it like it's free agency, they know that when they go to a school one year, they already know in the back of their mind, I'm transferring to another school another year after that. And it's within their right. I get it. The system wasn't fair to them before. Coaches could bounce and screw them. So they're taking advantage as they should, but they are making a mockery of the portal in a way as well, maybe exaggerating it to what it was intended to do. And yet Jose has a legitimate reason that seems like the NCAA has more of a problem with a player trying to go to another school because he doesn't want to be with a place that doesn't have the coach that he went there for than all these other reasons that seem really off the wall.
I don't take this the wrong way, but it's like, I mean, he's playing in Manhattan, he's playing in his hometown, but say he wasn't playing there, say he was playing across the country and he comes back and transfers to either Manhattan, St. John's, one of those New York schools, he's probably eligible. That's why Eric Stevenson got a year at Washington without having to sit out. Like, why? What's the difference between JT Daniels and Eric Stevenson playing on 4 teams and Jose Perez playing on 4 teams? None of those guys have had to sit out yet. That that's just the inconsistency at that point.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe a lot of the guys that have transferred had a lot of injuries to be involved. I mean, JT Daniels does have a lot of injuries to point to. That would be one thing that's maybe different. But yeah, it was just common sense. Everybody knew once JT Daniels lost his starting job, okay, he's probably going to transfer again. He has another year of eligibility because of all the injuries. No one's faulting him for it. The program's not either. Like, you're not going to be our guy, so go ahead and be someone else's guy. It looks ridiculous, but if he's not going to get an NFL contract, the XFL doesn't start until the spring. West Virginia's not going to have you start. What are you going to do? The option for him was to transfer or literally not play football at all in the fall anywhere. So he had to go. He ends up at Rice. You could argue maybe that kind of was maybe an odd destination for him, but that's where he ends up. And Perez is now in a similar boat that it wasn't off an injury, but it was off a coach being fired, that now, because he lost, he can't play ball at all this whole year. And if he turns pro, then obviously he can't play West Virginia. And Huggins tells him it's in his best interest to wait and play next year, which maybe is also self-serving. And it might also be he was a player of the year in a conference last year, but it's not like he's a first-round NBA draft pick here. He does need more seasoning, but that's really hard as a sales pitch to tell a kid basically to just chill on a couch. And then what kind of shape is he in? I mean, he doesn't 19 points per game 2 years ago isn't the same as the prior season. Like, you don't know what you're getting next year in terms of the shape he's in. What kind of ball is he playing? I mean, him in his backyard with his friends is not major college basketball. But did you learn anything else on that front just from conversations you've had on maybe why that decision was made, or at least, because I guess we don't know that and maybe never will, why the program really thought they were getting him and going to win this appeal and then it didn't go their way? Because I'm honestly surprised. I think you were surprised as well, probably, that this decision didn't go Perez's way.
Yeah. Coach Huggins the entire time he's been pretty confident in it. I would say up until the waiver got denied the first time, that's when he's kind of slowly become a little negative about it and saying the NCAA doesn't know what they're doing. I think I honestly don't know why Perez's waiver got denied initially. My thought would be either just the time he transferred, obviously being so far into the fall semester, but then
people
why
thought
can't
it was
play
the academic semester. Yeah, that's why they thought, okay, January is what they're going to point to, because then every school in the country has transitioned semesters. Right.
And then another thought that I've heard around, it's slowly spiraled, is just I mean, he technically did practice with Manhattan in October when the season technically started. Despite his coach getting fired, he still practiced with another team. So that's another point that I could buy into, but
yeah, because
either way,
I mean, I have seen now the NCAA is talk. It seems like with some reports, they actually are trying to tighten up on players transferring too much in a college career. But again, they're allowing JT Daniels. I mean, it's
it
literally
doesn't.
4 times. I mean,
I could bring up 10 to 15 players just off the top of my head that shouldn't be eligible
right.
after playing 4 different schools, and then Jose actually has a reason in the transfer portal era too, and he's still denied. I haven't seen a player denied a waiver in probably a year or two at least.
Yeah, in the transfer portal era. If this was 3 years ago, I don't think anyone would be surprised. The surprise really is that it's now in the transfer portal era.
Yep.
So, I don't know what the NCAA's reasoning could be. That is maybe a point that I have not seen anyone bring up, but is accurate. It could be that I don't know if there was another example of anybody who's technically been in the midst of a season as part of a team, because you can't transfer in the middle of a year, basically, once you're playing games. So he didn't play, but maybe because the practice minutes were accrued, they were like, okay, you're preparing for a game for another program. You can't all of a sudden now be transferring when the season started, even though it didn't really. I don't know. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here as we wrap things up. I do also want to ask you about Jalen Bridges. That was kind of the story. Obviously, this team continuing to lose ends up being the headline because they just got to get a win, and now it looks like the season going down the drain. But Jalen Bridges was a beast. He kind of was a little bit of what West Virginia fans always hoped he would be, because he had this ability in him, but also had some other issues that maybe crept up. He's now at Baylor. He got his revenge in a way. I mean, he was the one who won. He was the best player there. He got a homecoming of sorts. I saw he actually was smiling and kind of laughing with the media a little bit in the post-game presser, but I guess, like, why not? Everything went his way. Did he say anything interesting? Was there any kind of vibe that was maybe different than what you expected in terms of paint the picture of the atmosphere there? People think, okay, a former player returns somewhere, you're going to have batteries thrown. Like, what was it? How did the fans treat him? I know there were some signs. I know there were some things said. How was he treated there? What was even the vibe between current Mountaineers and Bridges that maybe he does actually know? Obviously, a lot of them he would not. Even Huggins and him, was there a handshake? I didn't see that. Any comments from Bridges that stood out? And then just him as a player. Any differences of seeing him now almost embracing being the heel and liking this role on a Baylor team with some promise versus what he was at West Virginia?
Yeah, as soon as Jalen Bridges came out of the tunnel, out of the visitors' tunnel, it was weird seeing him in a different color. Covered him for 2 seasons when he played, and seeing him in the green and yellow instead of the gold and blue was it was a little different.
Yeah,
it was definitely a unique experience. But he embraced being the villain, like we said. As soon as he came out, he's warming up. He's embracing the student section, calling him a traitor, and saying, "Jalen, you suck," and "F you, Jalen," all that. He's taking it all in. He's smiling through warm-ups. He's talking to his current teammates at Baylor about what this is like, and he even said it post game. He knew what he was getting himself into.
yeah.
He played. He was on the team here for 3 years, played for 2, but he knew exactly what he was getting himself into, and he said after the game that his teammates, he prepared his teammates, and his teammates prepared him as well. After the game, all of his teammates came around him and embraced him, and it was almost like a celebration just for Jalen for coming in and defeating his former team. So
Yeah.
it's exactly what you expect out of a player returning to his former school after he transferred, especially in conference to a conference rival.
I mean, we haven't seen this as much throughout the history of college sports because it's been a lot harder for players to transfer. Prior to recently with the portal, they'd have to sit out. By that point, a lot of the former players that you knew and coaches are no longer there at those schools. But this is a direct change year to year, and this is the portal era, so there's no sitting out. This is a connection, obviously, coach to player. It's still got. Was there anything between Huggins and Bridges at all?
Not that I saw.
Did Huggins say anything about Bridges at all? Was he asked about Bridges?
No, nothing was asked about.
Okay.
Nothing was asked about JB.
Of course.
Yeah, but
the Perez news probably saved him from having to get a question about Bridges, I bet.
Oh, for sure. And the comment about Jalen as a player, he's much improved. I feel like he's more involved in the Baylor offense. Of course, he has to play the 4 like he did at West Virginia, just because of injury circumstances with Baylor.
Yeah, 10 points, 11 rebounds, so a double-double, 3 assists. I mean, it's not like he's putting up, 30 and 30 here, but he made an impact in this game. And yeah, it seems like he's doing more and causing more of an impact even when he's not scoring. He's real aggressive on the boards. Double doubles. If he put up 10 and 11 every game for West Virginia, I don't think any fan would have been upset with him.
He also played 36 minutes.
Yeah.
He played almost every minute of the game. So for him to come in, credit to Jalen. He played his butt off tonight.
Yeah, and I guess, if you're going to make a decision, it's not even also just for anyone who doesn't know. This isn't even just a guy transferring from one school to the other, because that happens all the time now. It's maybe not so weird. This is a kid from West Virginia, a West Virginia high school product that was thought to maybe usher in a new era of West Virginia University basketball when he got there. His career at WVU was kind of a disappointment, certainly team-wise, and then his transfer news was kind of surprising and out of nowhere. And when he did transfer, and this is out there, so I'm not, putting anyone's personal business out there, himself and other loved ones of his were very public with their thoughts on the matter. It seemed like a little bit he wasn't just transferring for basketball reasons, even though they maybe were better for him, but that there was a rift, whether it be him and Huggins, him and the program, him and the team. Obviously, a lot of those players are not still there, but something happened that we're not even still fully aware of, but he was not happy with something that went on with West Virginia basketball or the program and wanted out of there. And now it does feel like he almost likes screwing the program over a little bit and beating the program, which, yeah, go ahead and be that because you're on the opponent now, as you should. But it's just a weird scenario. It really, really is a weird scenario. Even seeing him in a Baylor uniform is kind of weird. I'm happy that he's playing well, too. You want to wish a kid well. And I guess if you're going to be that guy who's the heel that turns on the program that you were rooting for as a kid and end up playing for a couple years, and then you turn on them and go to another team in the same conference, then you got to play well and got to deliver, or you're really going to get scrutinized. I mean, if he dropped an egg in this game and West Virginia dominated, he'd hear it on social media all day, but, he's laughing last now. So if you're going to be that guy and actually have the success and get it done, then you're embracing being the heel the right way. But yeah, what a weird day. Like, what a weird 4-hour period covering West Virginia basketball. You get the Perez news. That was a loss, obviously. You get into the game. It felt like a loss early. They then get back in there. They eventually end up losing. And then the guy you lose to is one of your own. That feels like another loss. So quite frankly, in about 5 hours, it feels like West Virginia lost 3 times.
Yeah, a lot of losses, a lot of the same stories.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and yet we're able to talk about it here on this post-game show. But it does feel like West Virginia's just been catching L's left and right. When that'll change, nobody knows. Something got to change, though. And while there's still a team that there's some reason maybe to believe in, that some are believing in, they got to prove they're different than the rest. They got to play better. They got to get some freaking victories, or none of it's going to matter. So as you go to bed at night, once again, you can't sing Country Roads. Stay tuned for whenever that happens, because every game now was a must-win. And, yeah, this team, moral of the story, and we didn't even need to do a show to say this, regardless of Perez, regardless of Bridges, regardless of who's on the floor and who's not and what's going on and who's hitting shots and how the lineup looks and who's the coach, etc., they just got to win a game. They got to win a game.
It sounds stupid and it sounds like poor analysis, but they literally just have to win a game. They just have to win a game to boost their confidence. That's it.
They really, it does feel like, yeah, they have to win. Duh. Like, you can't go 0-5, can't go 0-6, go 0-7. Huggins hadn't had a 7-game losing streak in a decade before last year when he did it twice. Imagine if he does it 3 times in a year. A calendar year, which would basically be what we're talking about here. It doesn't feel like this team should be this bad. Last year's team, yeah, that team was just bad. This team shouldn't be this bad.
This team has so much more talent than last year's team.
Yeah,
so
and you know that, I know that, but we're not going to win those arguments unless they start winning some games. If they don't win any games, being competitive and still losing and getting screwed over by the NCAA, that doesn't look that cool. There's no ring that says moral victory got screwed by the NCAA. That's not on a ring. You're not going to hang a banner saying that. They just have to win a game. The West Virginia Mountaineers have to win a game. We'll let you know when they do.